Institute's history, we have supported U.S. efforts to prevent and respond to mass atrocities, including in 2009, when we co-chaired the Genocide Prevention Task Force, which has provided the broad framework for U.S. atrocity prevention and response policy. Over the past year, USIP has re-energized and expanded this role to address indicators of rising risk of mass atrocities, to protect civilians, and to hold perpetrators of atrocities accountable. The Office of the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide plays a critical role in strengthening the UN's ability to prevent and respond to atrocities, including providing early warning on high-risk atrocity situations and recommending measures to mitigate atrocity risk. The office also engages member states on issues such as hate speech and genocide denial, core indicators of rising atrocity risk, and works in partnership with member states and civil society to develop plans to mitigate those risks. This work is central to the UN's ability to prevent atrocities and to protect vulnerable civilian populations. So we're very pleased today to have Ms. Nderitu here to talk about her work and the work that her office is doing and the ways in which she supports the UN in better protecting civilian populations. Ms. Nderitu is not a newcomer to USIP. We've been working together with Ms. Nderitu and her teams throughout the years, and it is a pleasure to have her here back at one of her many homes around the world, and we're extremely pleased to be able to have her with us today. She's a recognized voice in the field of peace building and violence prevention, having led as mediator and senior advisor in reconciliation processes. She also served as commissioner of the National Cohesion and Integration Commission in Kenya, as well as founding member and co-chair of the Uwiano Platform for Peace, a prevention agency linking early warning to early response. She was also one of the founders of Community Voices for Peace and Pluralism, which is a network of African women professionals preventing, transforming, and solving violent ethnic, racial, and religious conflicts worldwide. Widely published, she is the recipient of numerous awards recognizing her commitment to peaceful conflict transformation throughout Africa and her innovative approach to mediation. Our online viewers are welcome to join in the discussion using the chat box on our event webpage and the hashtag USIP Atrocity Prevention. So I'm very pleased to now turn the floor to Ms. Nderitu for her remarks.
Thank you very much to USIP for having me again. This is the first time I'm coming to USIP in this capacity, but I've been here several times before. And I do know that USIP has provided opportunities for me and others to voice quite a number of issues. And so really I'm glad to be here today. So I appreciate the important work of USIP, which I know quite well. And in my new capacity as the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, which is not so new because I've been around now for 2 years, my role and that of my office is to act as a catalyst to raise alarm to the Secretary-General and through him to the Security Council and other relevant actors on situations where there is a risk of genocide or related crimes and make recommendations for preventative action. So together with the Special Advisor on the responsibility to protect, my office works under a common methodology for the prevention of atrocity crimes, by which I mean genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So this mandate is global, meaning that my office looks at situations worldwide where there is a risk that atrocity crimes could occur. This is because there is no part of the world that is immune to the risk of these crimes, and in fact, all societies may have some indicators of risk. And it is often how societies respond to these risks that determine if a situation escalates into more serious concern, including in the most serious instances, the commission of atrocity crimes. Now, based on my experience as a mediator and as a peace builder of many years standing, I do consider it as a priority to translate from an intergenerational perspective the concept of genocide prevention as an international and national norm into a practical reality implemented at community levels. So much research points at atrocities happening within local communities, pointing at civilians as a primary target. And I say so from personal experience, knowing that in all the places that I have worked, that I've often seen atrocity crimes happening to people on the ground, and people on the ground at the community level, all the civilians who are the targets of these attacks, not only not recognizing that what's happening to them is an atrocity, so they do not understand that this is not violence, that this is not armed conflict, that this is an atrocity crime, and therefore they do not have the capacity to engage with what is happening to them from a perspective of what do you do when atrocity crimes are happening to you. And that's been one of my key driving forces, to take this whole concept of prevention of genocide that has such an international approach, such a regional approach, such a national approach, to the extent that often we expect governments to react. We do not expect the people who are targeted to have any agency to do something about this. We need to take that to the level where these communities know that they have some agency and know how to recognize what's happening to them. So in light of that, what we do, we collect and analyze information on risks of genocide. We follow up on sources, and that includes field visits. So, for example, I just arrived yesterday morning from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We verify information, and all this we do on the basis of the framework of analysis of atrocity crimes, which is a tool that's available on our website, developed by my office to assess risks of genocide and other atrocity crimes. This tool sets out the most common risk factors of atrocity crimes and corresponding indicators. So when we verify this information, we are then able to provide early warning on actions to prevent or halt genocide to the Secretary-General and Security Council on situations that could escalate to atrocity crimes. So this tool is also used by all actors, government, civil society, academia, and it's also used by us in the UN system as well. So for example, I had a team coming to see me of indigenous people from Brazil, and they've analyzed what's been happening to them on the basis of this framework of analysis. And so therefore, they are able to say, and which is why I'm talking about the agency that people have on the ground, they're able to say, according to this framework of analysis of atrocity crimes, which is the UN official policy on analyzing atrocity crimes, what is happening to us, we see it as an atrocity. So my mandate is important for what it says, but also important for what it does not say. So for example, it does not equip me with the prerogative of determining whether genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity have been committed, because only a competent, independent court of justice can determine this. At the same time, accountability is so central to my mandate, especially in situations where there are serious allegations of commission of atrocity crimes. So in such situations, without accountability, we do know that perpetrators might feel invited to continue committing such crimes in light of ongoing impunity, or victims may decide to seek revenge if they find no appropriate criminal accountability or judicial venue to address their allegations. So there is still the perception that pursuing accountability can be detrimental to making and sustaining peace. Many see a contradiction in pursuing peace and justice, as if these two were different and mutually exclusive categories. So as many, we at the United Nations, we do not see things that way. On the contrary, accountability constitutes a key component of peace. Without it, when there is impunity for past perpetrators, the circle of revenge is fueled and can continue. So must say to you that I came to the United Nations strongly conscious of the millions, maybe even billions of people around the world who know that atrocity crimes are going to happen to them and they have nobody to tell. And I remain conscious of that fact. Every day when I wake up and I'm going to work, I think about those people because I know them. I know that experience. I've lived it. And we who work in this field of prevention of atrocity crimes, we work with the reality of knowing that the prevention of atrocity crimes has made great progress in identifying factors putting a society at greater risk of experiencing atrocities. We also know that this has not translated into widespread effective early warning and response mechanisms to prevent their commission. So this means that where early warning concerns are raised, prompt, well-informed early response actions on atrocity crimes are not happening in many parts of the world. So there are many reasons for this, because atrocity crimes do not only happen during armed conflict, sometimes they happen, for instance, with indigenous people, like I've just mentioned, or with migrants or refugees in many countries that are not in conflict. So prevention, we know, also costs money, and it's often hard to make the case because the outcome of prevention, absence of atrocity crimes, sometimes cannot be proven. Indeed, I've noticed on our Twitter page, one of the questions I get asked most often is, so how many genocides have you prevented? Can you prove it? So it's so difficult to prove what you've prevented, and that really becomes what those of us who work in prevention know. So we do know that there is almost unanimous consensus that the primary responsibility to prevent rests first and foremost with national governments. And this responsibility is clearly articulated in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which not only obligates states not to commit genocide, but also obligates them to prevent genocide, to punish genocide, and enact the necessary legislation to give effort to the provisions of the Convention. And with that in mind, we are paying specific attention to the 153 countries that have ratified the Genocide Convention, the 1948 Genocide Convention, supporting them in domesticating, supporting them in creating policies, legislation that then support this Genocide Convention and that criminalize genocide. People think that genocide is so far away from them, but genocide is with us. It's always a step away. So we therefore also support strengthening institutions, independent human rights institutions all over the world. We strengthen institutional dispute resolution institutions, judicial institutions. We work with law enforcement. We work with electoral commissions, and we advance implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, each of which has its own indicators and measures of success. And as I often say, every failed sustainable development goal creates a risk factor for atrocity crimes. That is not far-fetched. When you think about food security, for example, if you don't have food security, then that already becomes a risk factor. So we have learned from experience, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here, that if we are more likely to succeed if we help connect the prevention dots for atrocity crimes systems worldwide and at country level. And if there is a buy-in from national governments, that's usually a great reason to succeed. But sometimes governments are those we need to prevent from atrocity crimes. So prevention is also more likely when national actors are involved that go beyond government and also include other actors and institutions. So, for example, we have a plan of action, for religious leaders and actors to prevent violence that could lead to atrocity crimes. We are in the process of developing a similar plan of action with traditional leaders. We are also working with people in the business community, people in the sports community to develop these plans of action. We have another one that's ready that we are launching during the CSW, the first one ever of women, how women can work to prevent violence that could lead to atrocity crimes. And the whole approach towards this has been geared around identifying in societies who are the most influential actors and what is it that they need to do to prevent atrocity crimes. We are trying to normalize the language of prevention of atrocity crimes to all these constituencies so that when they speak it, then it becomes, people then take it seriously. So we also have great examples with academic institutions. For example, in the Costa Rica, where the UN country team in Costa Rica is working with the University of Costa Rica, where they're producing, they have a plan of action on hate speech, the UN country team, and that plan of action is in partnership with the university. So students in the university are researching on hate speech, and so there is direct flow of information between the research and the action that the UN is taking. So success, of course, is likely to depend on how sustainable these kind of efforts are, and we need targeted interventions that are important in terms of their impact, but also important in terms of sustainability. So therefore, for risk assessment and analysis, in addition to offering assistance to national authorities and to communities, we work with so many civil society actors around the world. We also work with other assessment processes such as the Universal Periodic Review process, which is so important because of its granular nature and its universality. So I also conduct country visits in which we fact find. Like I said, I just came from the DRC. I've been to quite a number of countries this year. I've been to Iraq, I've been to Central Asia, I've been to Kyrgyzstan, I've been to Bangladesh, I've been to Nigeria, I've been to quite a number of places. And in all these places, we build information, we conduct assessment exercises on risk factors in our framework of analysis with national actors when they are willing to do this. And for example, we did this with special jurisdiction for peace institutions in Colombia. And we also support the development and implementation of hate speech action plans in coordination with UN country teams. And in terms of provision of visibility to good practices at country level, my office is very powerful around that. So I've mentioned hate speech. My office also leads the implementation of the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, which was launched by the Secretary-General in 2019. This strategy sets out guidance for United Nations entities and other societal actors to address hate speech at the national and global level, enhance efforts to tackle the root causes and drivers of hate speech, including racism and racial discrimination, therefore enabling effective responses by the United Nations system to the impact of hate speech on societies. This strategy is in line with international human rights standards and with the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And we often say, we are not saying people shouldn't speak. We are saying we should speak more, but we should speak more from a responsible perspective. And in that respect, we are supporting globally several UN country teams around the world, peacekeeping and special political missions and member states who have developed and implemented context-specific action plans on hate speech. And I often say that lots of analysis is done around the world, but when there is analysis, because some of the national governments have also started writing up their own national action plans on hate speech, to see what a country thinks is hate speech, to see what a country feels is the threshold for incitement to violence, because that's what we look at when looking at hate speech. It's a completely different way of looking at things. So I've spoken about our plans of action, and I've spoken about the fact that we look at all these influential mitigating actors in society. So we have work that we are working on with parliaments as well, to develop plans of action, both for themselves on how to deal with the hate speech that happens in parliaments, where, of course, in many cases, you can get away, you have the freedom to say whatever you want in parliament, including sometimes including what could be considered as hate speech. And We are supporting scholars in the development of examinable courses and academic modules, incorporating genocide studies and prevention, some of it into existing teaching and some of it as new teaching. So far we've had a meeting with African scholars. We met in December last year in Dakar to develop the continent's first atrocity prevention curriculum. And when we were looking for the scholars to come, we decided not to place this in any discipline. So we looked for scholars. So we had agricultural engineers in the room, we had nutritionists, we had lawyers, and all of them. Because, from experience, I know atrocity crimes, when they happen to everyone. Genocides, war crimes, crimes against humanities, they don't spare engineers, they don't spare architects, they happen to everyone. So we had everyone in the room giving us their perspective of how do you interpret the prevention of atrocity crimes from an architectural perspective. When you think about who builds the torture chambers in places where atrocity crimes happen, if you go to Auschwitz and you see that gas chamber and you think to yourself, who built this and were they ever held accountable? When you think about the justice system that we have that focuses so strongly on the person with the highest responsibility and then doesn't focus on people who hold lower responsibilities, then you see the need to engage everyone on this perspective. We've also done the same thing with Asian scholars, and we already have an atrocity crimes curriculum for universities that's already being piloted in universities in Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Thailand. We have a teacher training module for secondary school students, again, that's already being piloted. We have also worked with the European Union. We've set up an atrocity prevention toolkit that again is already being used. And I would say that in terms of all this, communication is key in terms of putting out all the issues. The UN, we have a working definition of hate speech. We know that we don't have a universal definition of hate speech, and that's a challenge because different countries have different approaches to what they would call hate speech. And so our definition of hate speech is linked to the reason why the office that I lead is the one that's the United Nations focal point for hate speech. We do know that among the risk factors for genocide, hate speech ranks high. To commit atrocity crimes, it's important to dehumanize people, the people who are targeted for those crimes to be committed on them. And in dehumanizing those people, hate speech is used. And so we know that when the Holocaust was happening, for example, or when the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda was happening, when the genocide in Srebrenica was happening, that at that time, if social media existed, it didn't exist to the extent it does now. And for the Holocaust, for example, it wasn't there at all. So we engage with tech and social media companies globally. We have a method that moved from condemning them in terms of what they do to sitting with them. So we have roundtables with them, and in these roundtables we discuss their business profit model, and I tell them, this is what your business profit model does to the mandate that we have. This is what happens when we have one whole year of work around an issue, and then somebody from somewhere comes with a lie, with a falsehood, and hits the button, and this lie spreads around the world. So these roundtables produce recommendations for us to work together, and on the basis of these roundtables, we've been able to agree with tech and social media companies, and we have virtually like all of them, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all of them coming, Google, YouTube. We sit with them, and on the basis of these recommendations, we agreed on their use of the working definition of the UN on hate speech to create algorithms. We agreed on the use of that definition to create guidelines for content moderators. So there's been a lot of progress, and the last meeting that we had was just last week, Monday, last week, and we discussed with them the recommendations of the past years. We discussed self-regulation. We discussed, and it's a Chatham House rule meeting. We close the door. We don't attribute anything to anyone, but we speak about these issues. We give them practical examples. We show them how hate speech is propagated, for example, in places where tech and social media companies who have expanded to the whole world don't have translation for local languages. We also show them places where images that could mean something in one place mean something completely different in another space. And we give them very practical, granular examples of how this works. We also give them examples of coded language and stereotypes that are used, that then people get away with saying things that otherwise you wouldn't, no algorithm can catch. Sometimes not even a human being content moderator can catch. Like for example, in Rwanda, when they were targeting the Tutsi, they were talking about cutting the tall trees. No algorithm will capture that. We have so many uprooting the weeds. We have, for the Rohingya, remove the fleas. Just the other day, I issued a statement when a general in Ethiopia said that they are going to go to Tigray and remove the lice. So algorithms don't capture these kind of things. So we have key challenges when hate speech does not reach the threat of incitement, like the examples I've just given you, or when it is in those languages that they don't have translation for. And last year, I briefed the Security Council on the topic of tech and social media companies addressing and countering hate speech, and I invited tech and social media companies to brief with me, and we had a very useful session. So in areas where genocide has been proven conclusively to have happened by competent courts, like the Holocaust, Srebrenica, Bosnia-Herzegovina, 1995, Rwanda, 1994, we are extremely concerned about the divisive rhetoric which is giving rise to Holocaust denial and genocide denial. And like many people, I used to find this completely ridiculous. Like, how can somebody deny the Holocaust? How can you deny that a genocide happened? But I can tell you that in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I was able to make the connection between Holocaust deniers and genocide deniers. And how that happened was that I began to notice, because I've read a lot on Holocaust denial, and I began to notice that the arguments Holocaust deniers were making were the same arguments that were being made in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and same arguments that were being made in Rwanda. So I began to see the connection and to realize the Holocaust deniers were giving the world a template of denial for atrocity crimes. And looking at all this and looking at connecting the dots, then realized that there are conferences that have been held, for example, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where there was actually a commission of inquiry to prove that the genocide in Srebrenica did not happen. That conference was attended by Holocaust deniers, and they spoke at that conference. And then we have this picture, this photo from Foča, one of the cities in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where a young person born after the war, young people born after the war, they have several murals in many places, especially in Republika Srpska area. And these photos, these murals, are of people who've been convicted for genocide, and they treat them as heroes. And so we have these young people standing there, and they have the mural right in front of them, and they are saluting the mural with a Nazi salute. So I use that photo to explain to people to those of us who are peace builders, those of us who are mediators, those of us who work to prevent atrocity crimes, that if they can unite, if Holocaust deniers, genocide deniers can unite, really we must unite. And we must unite against them, because they are not united for the sake of just uniting. They are uniting for the sake, I always say, denial of the Holocaust, denial of the genocide is preparation for another Holocaust, is preparation for another genocide. And I don't say this as in jest. I say this in complete seriousness, and I can prove it. So what we've done, we partnered with an organization here in the US, the Jacob Blaustein Institute. We brought together a team of people who then began to form this core of people who need to stand up against these Holocaust deniers, against these genocide deniers. And we developed a policy document. It's on our website on Holocaust and genocide denial. How do you combat Holocaust and genocide denial? It has some practical ideas on how we do this. And we do know that we cannot ignore the fact of, in this world, that there is a very, very, very lucrative field and business for willing buyer, willing seller of arms. So we've really moved from the space where, in terms of committing atrocities, where we would be thinking that this is something that is so far-fetched. We do know that atrocities are happening now. They are happening now in quite a number of places where the availability of weapons is always at an all-time high. And we do know that we are living within a reality of increased privatization of security at the community level, yet diplomatic efforts are often aimed at trust building at top political levels. So we haven't built diplomatic capacity at the local level. And I often tell the ambassadors I meet in New York on a daily basis that I admire how they can fight and disagree in the General Assembly and then have coffee afterwards. And that's a capacity that we need to be able to take to the local level. How do people disagree and agree and then have coffee afterwards? So I would say that I do strongly believe that policing communities are the core of prevention, when sufficiently and sustainably supported, can be instrumental to effective action. And I do believe that ultimately prevention is local. I do know, of course, that governments have a lot of agency in ensuring that prevention is local. I do know sometimes governments do not want to ensure that prevention is local. And in countries that have experienced conflict in the past, when we bring together civil society and community leaders that represent a wide variety of constituencies to share their experiences, it becomes extremely vital to do so if the gains are to be sustainable and felt by all. And at the end of the day, it's imperative. And that's why we are using the approach of finding out who is most influential in societies to ensure that we get agents of transformation who can contribute not only to changing narratives, but also to encourage everyone to do their part to advocate for, build, and sustain peaceful coexistence. So I would really like to call on all countries in the world to prioritize prevention. Many of the conflicts that are happening now in the world, we had prior knowledge that they were going to happen. We've engaged behind the scenes with quite a number of these leaders. We engage with them in terms of explaining to them where vulnerable populations also reside and where atrocity crimes could happen. But this propensity for human beings to keep getting into wars is also the same propensity for human beings to get out of wars. We have spaces where we are able to live without wars for a period of time, and yet we have places where these wars keep going on and do not end. So I would just like to say that on that note, I'm grateful again to be here and to say that this discourse and analysis that's related to atrocity crimes, which has focused so almost exclusively on state-level political interactions, and missed out on this whole community and grassroots component of the local level, that it needs to be contextualized and meaningfully devolved to communities. So in terms of what I really feel strongly that needs to be taken away from the conversation, that is it. Because we still have, and even in my capacity in this position right now, I still get phone calls from people who tell me we are going to be attacked on this day, at this time, by the following people. And when we are, you please help us so that it doesn't happen. And so I reach out to all these networks and reach out to, the systems and reach out to everybody who can help. Sometimes it's too far for the help to reach. Sometimes it's too remote. But when we can, we are able to stop it. And so ultimately, if we get a world where people know that they are going to be attacked, but they know who to tell, then really we will have gotten somewhere. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Bailey. I'm the Senior Program Officer for Atrocity Prevention here at USIP, and I now have the honor of kicking off a facilitated discussion with Alice. I'm going to start off just by asking Alice a question, and then I would invite our audience to get engaged as well. We'll take questions in the room, and then we'll also take questions from our online audience. You can use hashtag USIP Atrocity Prevention. Alice, thank you so much for those remarks. They were incredibly rich and comprehensive. I was struck by how vast your mandate really is. Prevention is a significant task. I wanted to start off with a question about how you, in your day-to-day work, balance the focus on prevention at the local level with your global mandate. How do you manage your state partners and the Security Council while still prioritizing prevention at the local level?
Thank you very much. And again, thanks to everyone who made the time to come today and also to join online. I'm able to balance the two because we have UN field presences in many places. So I work very closely with the United Nations resident coordinators. So in quite a number of countries around the world, we have UN presences, so then it becomes easy. But also, before I came to the UN, I had this huge network of people around the world, civil society, especially women, especially. I was in so many women networks. So I'm able to balance because I can get very granular feedback on what's going on the ground from the people that I knew in my past life, but I can also get feedback from the UN field presences. So, so much of my work, like on a daily basis, involves. I speak a lot to the ambassadors in New York, the permanent representatives in New York and in Geneva. We speak about all kinds of things. I'm always looking for ideas that could become resolutions sponsored by these member states and putting them out. Last year we had great success, for example, with the Kingdom of Morocco, the permanent representative. He led this discussion that ended up becoming a resolution that actually gave us the first International Day of Countering Hate Speech. So there's balance, but what really helps me is that I never forget. If you ask anyone I work with in the office, I always tell them I don't forget where I come from because I'll go back there. And when I go back there, I want to be able to go and tell them I did something for you. So I always connect the prevention dots.
Thank you. That's really quite interesting. And good to see that not only are you a catalyst at the UN for these conversations, but a connector between the local and the national and international. Just one more question from me that I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about your DRC trip within this question. But it was very interesting for me and good to hear your comments on normalizing the language of atrocity crimes and that all states have risks. And I'd be curious to hear how you work with states to make them comfortable with that, because that's often a very sort of sensitive topic, the idea that a state has atrocity risk or is moving towards a potential risk of atrocities. How do you manage that process, and did that come up at all in your time in DRC?
I would say in terms of the language of atrocity crimes, because they are so grave, we talk about genocide as being the crime of crimes, and we know how difficult it is to prove it because you have to prove intent. I'm not comfortable with, I don't try to normalize it to the extent that people feel that it's not threatening. People should be taken aback when they hear that we are talking about atrocity crimes in their context. We should be taken aback. But at the same time, there remains such little knowledge among the people to whom atrocity crimes happens in communities in terms of recognition. So which is when I talk about normalizing, I want people who atrocity crimes happen to be able to say, what is happening to me is a genocide. What is happening to me is a war crime. This is what I can do about it. This is who I can reach about it. This is how I can go about it. If my government is not responsive, this is what I should do. So that's what I mean by normalizing. So in the context of the DRC, we know the DRC is a country that has been plagued with conflict, violent conflict, for years, for decades. So much that goes on in the country has a lot to do, of course, with resources. There is the aspect of resources. And so we have the anomaly of this country that is very rich in resources, but whose people are very poor. So there is conflict of resources, but there is also conflict of ideology. There is also conflict of identity. And my being in DRC was in response to quite a number of issues that are happening around the country, just the East, West as well. So in due time, I'll be speaking out in the next week or so with very concrete statement on what is happening there and what I think should be done about it.
Excellent, thank you. I'd like to open it up to our audience in the room. We do have a mic runner. Please feel free to raise your hands if you'd like to ask a question. Sally, we have down here. Over here. Oh. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, as a Palestinian refugee, I know well what is a genocide. Especially, I'm married to a Bosnian. So I met survivors from Srebrenica, and I know that my grandparents survived from the Palestinian genocide in 1948. Then now we are, me and my colleagues are refugees in Lebanon. We can't even visit our hometown. My dad was born in Lebanon. He can't visit his hometown, and we can't enter to our hometown even, not to live there, to visit it. And it's some kilometers away. I just wanted to share my story because I didn't hear anything about Palestine. And every day, genocide is happening there. Yesterday, they killed a 16-year-old girl. Before, a child in school. Before, elderly. So just I wanted to note this, and thank you.
I think we have someone in the back as well. Thank you for your comment.
Hi, my name is Madeline Moreno. First of all, I wanted to thank you for being here. I am a graduate student at American University here in DC, And I am curious, what is the relationship between, clearly your mandate is atrocity prevention, but what is the relationship with some of the other UN bodies that are tasked with sort of responding to atrocities? I know you talked about things you can do to combat hate speech, and what you can do when you receive a phone call that people are in danger. But I'm wondering about what can you really do for people like the Uyghurs who are interned in these camps and don't have access to phones or something like that that's already a genocide that's already underway.
Maybe I can ask Alice, when risk is rising, which I think is sort of the focus of the question, how does your work change? What are you doing to sort of address risk? What are you doing to help people who are at imminent risk or involved in an ongoing genocide?
Thank you. In terms of the connections of on the ground, we have the UN teams on the ground, so we speak directly to them in terms of the kind of issues that need to be responded to. But I can tell you that response, because most often we expect the national government is expected to respond to protect its civilians. It's not always the case, I know, and sometimes it's national governments that are actually perpetuating these issues, the atrocity crimes. We work with the UN country teams on the ground to ensure a response. So, for example, when you see like the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the team that works on refugees, we have the UNDP. So, like, for example, right now, UNDP is doing a lot of work in Nigeria, in Boko Haram territory, rebuilding homes, rebuilding infrastructure. The High Commissioner for Refugees, with who we have an MOU with, actually, on atrocity crimes and their prevention. We work a lot with them because we don't have field offices. So many offices, UN offices, are doing things in terms of prevention around the world. And response, sorry, not just prevention. When I talked about calling, I was speaking to the gravity of the larger situation because I know I'm speaking to people in the same field, that there is so much that can be done in this field of response. Response is still weak. Response is still expected to be either by the international bodies like the UN or national governments, and that agency at the ground level is not there. In Kenya, where I come from, we built this response, early warning linked to early response, where we identified what is it people can do within the spaces there to respond to these kind of situations, because there is quite a bit that can be done. So there is so much in this field of response that is not being done, that there isn't enough. There is a lot, I would say, of indicators of atrocity crimes, but in terms of response, we do need the support of the peace-building community to help us in the atrocity prevention community, to help to support the efforts that we are putting in place, because clearly they are not enough. So for Palestine, I'm sorry that I could not mention all the countries, but I can tell you there is a lot that we do behind the scenes in terms of informing all these debates that you see at the General Assembly, at the Security Council, and in terms of Palestine, in terms of working on issues to do with Palestine. Part of what I want to do next year, because it always helps, as I said in the speech, to understand the issues, but also to go to the ground. So part of what I would like to do next year, hopefully, is to go to Israel, to go to Palestine, and get for myself the granular issues on the ground and see how is it that we can engage better. And it's not just Palestine, there are so many places where all the time people require the office. We have people asking us about Kashmir. When can you do something about Kashmir? We have people talking about, of course, the Sahel, in the whole Sahel. Right now, there's so much going on there. The Great Lakes region, there's so much going on. Not to undermine what you've just said about Palestine, but you can be sure that we always have it on top of our radar. So, and then what is it you say that we are practically doing? I have mentioned some of the issues, working with these religious communities, working with them. And when we say working with religious communities, we work with religious communities from around the world to actually, when we know that something is happening, and which I think then goes back to the question of how do you prove what you've prevented? Because my job is to say, this is about to happen, how do we stop this? So beyond working with the religious leaders and the media and all these other constituencies, there are very practical ways that we work on in terms of, for example, ensuring that policies, ensuring that governments are speaking to each other. And so, for example, like the DRC, one of the things that I'm doing now, I had already met the ambassadors here from the Great Lakes before I went to the DRC. I will meet them again before issuing this statement to see what it is that we can stop. But I can tell you, until we have very serious conversations as a world in terms of how to regulate all these arms that are out there, in terms of how to ensure that there is all this free speech, but then what does it lead to in terms of social media and in terms of the kind of issues that are put out there, that there isn't much headway we will make. And also until we are able to get the leaders of the world to come to the moment, the kind of moment they came to when they were creating the United Nations, when they were saying never again, and then all these never again moments that come, and then the world is united and the world says we need to stop this. Until we get the world to get there, until we get especially the leaders who inform the geopolitics of the world to then speak with one voice on atrocity crimes, then it becomes very, very difficult. I would say one huge plus also is, the Atrocity Prevention Task Force here in the US. Now the UK is in the process of creating one itself. We've supported different governments. For example, in the Great Lakes region, all the countries there now have genocide prevention committees. So local ownership in terms of taking charge of preventing atrocity crimes is extremely important.
Thank you.
We could go to, we've got now 5, so we'll go, I saw Knox first, and then we'll come to you, and then we'll do 4 more. Let's take them all we'll take 2, I'll take them all at once. So Sailor, Knox is here with his hand up.
Hello, my name is Knox Thames. I'm a senior visiting expert here at USIP and a former diplomat. First, thank you for your service. Sadly, your mandate continues to grow with the increasing examples of atrocity crimes. 2 tough countries I want to ask you about, China and Afghanistan. We all know that the Office of the High Commissioner issued a really damning report on Chinese persecution of Uyghur Muslims. Many were very disappointed. The Human Rights Council voted against even taking up a discussion of that. At about the same time, the UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan discussed the risk of atrocities facing the Hazara community in Afghanistan at the hands of ISIS and the lack of Taliban protection provided by them. How are you engaging the Uyghur and Hazara communities and also the Chinese and not Afghan government, the Taliban. One, you've got the Chinese government with a documented list of, I think many would say are atrocity crimes against a religious minority. In Afghanistan, you've got a terrorist group specifically targeting the Hazara because of the religion and ethnicity. So I'd appreciate any insights you can provide.
We'll come down here. We can take a few at once. And if you could be brief in your question just for timing purposes, that would be wonderful. Here.
Hello. First, thank you for your service and thank you for being here. My name is Rami. I'm a Palestinian scriptwriter and I am a refugee in Lebanon. Before I came here, I went through your quotes and I have one question or two questions about one of these quotes. The quote says, conflict is a fact of life. Violence and conflict do not mean the same thing because conflict involves choices that include interventions before it becomes violent. We must now join hands to work towards the kind of interventions that promote community ownership of peace. My question, do you think this applies on the Palestinian cause, regardless of the non-stop killing of Palestinian innocent people since more than 70 years? Israel have been killing anyone regardless of their ages, sex, men or women, old or children. I think it's unfair for us to shake hands with our enemy who committed violence and massacres every day since 1948. My second question is, do you address what's happening in Palestine is a conflict? Thank you.
Okay, can you pass to just behind you? Please be very brief. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Katie. I am an undergraduate student at American University. Mine's more of a logistical question, but I'm wondering what mediums you use to promote productive dialogue when a lot of people have pre-existing biases or prejudices against those they're engaging in conversation with.
Hello, and my name is Predrag Sutanowicz. I'm a Peace Scholar Program Leader at American University, and a topic that seems to get forgotten, and the Secretary-General addressed this the other day, is Myanmar. I'm just wondering whether there are any processes going on right now to address the atrocities and to prevent them potentially from happening further in the future. And yeah, if you can talk anything more about that, we would appreciate it.
That's quite a bit of ground to cover, but please.
So starting with, starting with the Afghanistan and the Hazara, we had a meeting this week with some minority communities from Afghanistan. I'm not going to say about what because it could be dangerous for them. But I can tell you that and there are many. There is the Hazara, the Tajiks, the Sikhs, the Hindus. If quite a number, and some of them are almost extinct because of what's been happening there. There is some action we are going to take this week that I will not preempt. If I preempt it now, just to say that anyway, that we are dealing with this issue. And we've dealt with it extensively. The Hazara, we have most close to 2 years research now on the issues. And we've had meetings with so many of them, and there is definitely action that you will see. For the Uyghurs, we know that Michelle Bachelet issued the report just before she left, and that we have a new High Commissioner, Volker, and that he's just reported to Geneva. And so we will pick up this issue with him. The report itself doesn't specifically speak to genocide. It speaks to atrocity crimes, so we will follow up on this, because we needed a High Commissioner to have this conversation. So we are definitely following up on that. And then for the question on Palestine and whether I consider what's happening in Palestine to be a conflict, you know, when we teach about conflict and conflict prevention, we teach people that conflict, there's a difference between conflict and violent conflict. And violent conflict is what we try to avoid. That conflict, it happens, sometimes you'll bump into somebody and then maybe you'll say, why did you hit me like that? But then you will not get into a fight. Sometimes like conflict you happen, there's so many conflicts that happen every single day. The fact that they shouldn't lead to violent conflict is the problem. So of course, what's happening in Palestine is violent conflict. So, but not conflict. In Kiswahili, we say that even the tongue sometimes gets into conflict with the teeth, and then if the teeth bites the tongue, but when the two of them, the teeth and the tongue, when they see food, then they reconcile. So just explains like conflict. It's not violent conflict. So that quote speaks to that aspect, and it's good you've brought it out, because now I'll change it so that it can bring out the real meaning that it was supposed to bring out. So, so the question that I'd spoken to on Palestine before speaks to it. And then the issue of Myanmar, and I think I jumped one question.
And the mediums that you use. Is that the mediums that you use?
To promote dialogue, we'll have pre-existing biases or notions against those that are speaking one.
So we have a lot of mediums and methods. It depends on level of the conflict. It depends on who we are engaging with. I mediated for many years, so I used to write lots of, like I've even actually written a companion for women mediating armed conflict, the kind of what they need to do in terms of dialogue, how they need to prepare, that kind of thing. So everything depends on the context. Everything depends on what you're trying to speak to, and what you're trying to do, and who is in the room. So there are different methods, but the key method, of course, has to have, sometimes it's mediation, sometimes it's, it's a number of methods. But if what you want to do is solve whatever is going on, then you have to study intensely. Always, I would say to myself before, when I used to mediate, that I'll try to know as more about the conflict, that even those in the room to whom it's affecting, I'll try my best so that when they are speaking, then it's speaking to some knowledge that I have, so that they don't say something and I respond in an insensitive way. So it's so important to learn a lot about the situation, then that informs the dialogue. On Myanmar, on the Rohingya, what's happening to the Rohingya, still happening, is extremely important in regards to just giving an example to the world on what this can be done about this particular situation. I was in Bangladesh this year and spent a lot of time in Cox's Bazar with the Rohingya, just speaking with them and understanding what they feel about the current situation and where they came from. And in 2015, I was actually one of the people who went to Myanmar to help prepare the country for the elections. I was helping them to set up an early warning system, linking early warning to early response. And right now, we have quite a number of mechanisms that are dealing with the Myanmar issue that are so close to my mandate because we have the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, where the Myanmar government has been charged with, among other things, several counts of genocide. We have the ICC also is on the ground. We have the International Independent Mechanism for Myanmar that is mandated by the Human Rights Council and led by the UN. And all of this, because the charges are on atrocity crimes, we follow closely, we support closely. And the International Court of Justice, the country that complained to the international, that brought the charge against Myanmar is Gambia. And you know, Gambia is this really small country that's even in the middle of Senegal, but they were able to take another, the country of Myanmar to court. And they did so because they've ratified the Convention of Genocide. And we look forward to when other member states, other countries, member states of the UN can do so for other situations like around the world. So we are very supportive of the Gambian team, the Gambian prosecution team. We've also been very supportive towards the fact of that so much of the mobilization of against the Rohingya happened on Facebook. And that Facebook then has now given this evidence to ICJ. So it's extremely useful. But I must say, in terms of being realistic and in terms of somebody like me who relied, come from a country that relied on international courts sometimes to sort out issues, I would say that part of what we are crafting now and part of why this work that I'm talking about, working with communities, is so important, is that international courts usually go for the person with the highest responsibility. So then you have then at the local level, and it happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it happened in Rwanda, it happened everywhere, even after the Holocaust, where local level perpetrators are free. Nobody holds them accountable. And because the justice system is weak or the justice system is not willing to. So when I speak about the role that we have in terms of strengthening local level national mechanisms, it's extremely important that this happens because at the end of the day, the justice that we seek so much, and I talked about peace and justice working together, becomes extremely difficult to feel that sense that it's happened. If, for example, you feel that the people at the local level, if you are seeing your rapist walking up and down every day, or you're seeing the person who killed your father and mother walking around every day, and you feel that there's nothing you can do about it, that there is so much that needs to be done about that particular aspect. So when you talk about linking the local and the policy level, like in New York, those are the kind of conversations that I am having with ambassadors in New York and telling them, if the world was able to devise these international courts, this international criminal justice system, that then takes care of the person with the highest responsibility, what do we need to do about the people with the lower responsibility that are not being held to account?
Alice, thank you so much for your sharing all of the work that you do. It's an impressive amount of work, a challenging mandate, but it's been wonderful to hear how much you're doing, the richness of what you're doing, and how much you're pulling your background as a local peace builder into the office of the Special Advisor, the position of the Special Advisor. Thank you all for taking time to come and join us for this conversation. We appreciate your participation, and thank you, Alice, for your work.
Thank you.